Hi there. Today I'd like to talk about starting a new floor plan drawing. And AutoCAD, as we have seen so far, you can draw all sorts of things. We haven't really drawn anything to scale yet. And one of the things AutoCAD drawings all have some kind of scale in the background. Usually everything is one-to-one scale, but it translates that. It can be either numerical, decimal, or in the United States, the only country left that still uses kind of US standard or imperial units, as they might be called. The way you can tell what the units of your drawing are is to type in the word units and hit enter, and you'll see a menu that comes up and shows you the units. Now, this is the carpet drawing from the previous exercises. You can see that this was just a blank template that I used. So the lengths are measured in decimals, and they are precision of extremely, extremely precise, way more precise than architectural needs. Now, we could absolutely change this to architectural drawings, and then we could change the precision for a floor plan. Probably 1/8 of an inch is fine. For school uses, maybe a 1/2 inch is fine. And what that will do is it'll round your numbers to the nearest 1/4 inch. Okay. You can also use degrees, minutes, and seconds for the angles. And this will give us numbers that are traditional units. So if I were to say draw a line, now you'll see my readout is 9.5 inches if you look here, or 12, or whatever it is. Okay, now that doesn't really help us though when we want to start a new drawing for a floor plan. Usually what I do is use a template. And I cannot emphasize enough that it is critical that you use a template when starting a new project, architectural project, mainly because most offices that you work in will already have a project that they've done that has all the settings in it for printing and for using different sheet borders and that sort of thing. So I would absolutely do that. Now, when you go and hit Command N for a new project, you could also tap the New button if you want. You'll see that AutoCAD has a bunch of templates, and these are what you see when you first start AutoCAD. There's a number of different ones. There's some that are tutorials. There's some that are metric. There's the AutoCAD standard template, which is the one that comes up when you don't do anything else. What I'm going to do is choose a template that we use here on our campus for interior design uses. It's called the Endicott 2017 template. Click Open. And what you'll see, first of all, this drawing, like many of the templates from AutoCAD, already has a title block in it. There's 24 by 36, which is a sheet we commonly use on our campus. Also 18 by 24 and 11 by 17. Okay, and then it has down here, again, I'm switching to these tabs. There is a tab for the model where you can draw, and there's just kind of a reference line, reference rectangle in here just to kind of know where 0 is. And by the way, there's a number of settings that I have changed in my viewport here so that my application runs a little more cleanly. First of all, I don't like to show the grid. So those of you who like the grid, you can turn it on, and you can even turn on the snap to grid feature, which does have its handy features. I also keep line weights turned off. Again, these are the drawing modes that I mentioned in the previous lecture. There's the line weight button, there's the snap to grid, and there is the grid display. I'll leave those off. Other things that I like to do, first of all, I often will get rid of these menus here. This one here, the properties menu, you can make it float. I'm just going to close it. You can bring it back if you go to the Windows pull-down menu. You can bring it back by choosing properties or right-clicking on some object and choosing properties from the drop-down list. I'm going to be focusing on typing in the commands, which I believe I mentioned last time is a more efficient way to do things. So I can hide the tool sets here. Okay, you see how on a laptop that really gives me a little more kind of acreage to draw in. I'm also going to use the full screen mode. On a Mac, it's Control plus Command plus F. On a PC, I believe it's Control Alt F. I could even hide these buttons up here, although I do like to have the undo and redo buttons handy. And what you'll see in this mode, you see how I've basically maximized every bit of my screen. And I really don't have to, like I have the whole area to draw in, and I can type my commands as needed. I don't need to pick on the buttons. So anyway, that's how you start a new floor plan, or how you start a new project with a blank template. Now, what are we going to draw? Well, let's call up, I believe I have a sketch here of a floor plan that we can use. And it's pretty simple. And of course, this is an exercise, so we're going to be approximate at best. But as you can see, what we have, this is a hand-drawn sketch, and we have some overall dimensions. And what we'll do, I'll show you kind of a, best practices technique for drawing a floor plan. Now, first of all, what I'm going to do is have my sketch visible at the same time. So of course I'm going to have to go out of my full screen mode. I'm also going to delete this reference box. Again, that's just there to help me know how far to zoom in and out. And now, just for convenience, I'm going to start near the origin. Some people are more doctrinaire about starting right on the origin. I don't know why, I just prefer to start near it, but not on it. And what I do is I draw the overall shape of the interior as best as I can, using the numbers that are measured here now. And of course, these are what you might want to call fieldwork numbers, so they there's always going to be numbers missing. But we'll see if we can just kind of go by memory for the numbers that are missing. Before you even start, one of the things that you need to do in AutoCAD when you're drawing a plan, you need to be absolutely certain that you use layers very carefully. So as I did last lecture, I will call up the layer dialog box and go and find a layer that makes sense for what I'm about to draw. And usually what you do is you start with the walls. What you'll find in this template, the walls are the current layer. But anyway, if you have not already done that, double click on the wall layer. And again, you can just double click on a layer. It makes it current by the indicator here shows that. Anyway, and then you can just close that. Now when I draw a line, it should be on the wall layer. Now, the easiest thing to do when you draw these walls is to start by drawing a line, okay? And I'm going to follow the measurements along the wall here. And of course, I don't know them all by heart, but I know many of them, so I can tell you that as I draw, one of the things is I could absolutely follow my tooltip and just try to draw it as close as possible to the number. But really what I want to do is enter the number exactly. And because this is a rectilinear room, I'm going to force AutoCAD into rectilinear drawing mode. This is called ortho mode. And again, you just click it, and you can see down here that these buttons, they kind of look, I don't know, depressed, I suppose. They're a little darker when they are active. So again, I'll start my line command. Now I can only draw at 90-degree angles, and this is of course critical for my effort here. And I'm going to start and draw the horizontal wall here. Not everything is going to be drawn exactly as you see it. I'll show you that there are a number of techniques to as you draw. But so 4'11" is the first distance. If I just type in that number and hit enter while my cursor is over facing off to the right, see how it draws a line in that direction. So that is called direct entry, and your cursor gives you a readout of how far you are, but you can absolutely just type in numbers to represent these distances. So I believe the frame in this window is 4 inches, enter, and then the distance between the window is 3'9", and enter, and then another 4 inches, and enter, 3'9", and enter, 4 inches, enter, 3'9", enter, 4, enter, and then 4'11" on the other side, 4'11". Okay, so you might say that looks like one big line. Well, really what you'll see, if I use a selection window, see how there are a number of lines that are drawn here? I can use those lines to draw my window. I happen to know that the whole window is inset about 4 inches. So I'll change it to 4 inches by moving it down. And again, I will not be repeating commands that we learned last time. Now, each of these pieces of window, these, first of all, they need to be on a different layer. They're not walls, they're window glazing. So if I right-click on them and get their properties, and as you remember, I hid that properties menu, I can come in here and change the layer to be something like window glazing. And hopefully the line color will change. The same with these squares here. These are representative of the window frame. So I can change these, whoops, don't change the color. I can change them to the window frame layer, and hopefully we've got a different color. Okay. Now, I can continue to draw my lines for my walls, but these are exterior walls, and I know they're about a foot thick. In fact, I think they're actually 16 inches. In AutoCAD, you can type in 16 inches. You can also type in 1'6" or 1'4". It accepts a number of different ways of entering the thickness. Anyway, and I can draw my wall this way, or I can just hit escape to end the command. Okay, now the window frame and the glazing is in the middle of the frame, so again I could move this glazing down about 2 inches, and then I could come in here and draw the lines that represent the rest of the frame. Again, I'm using this direct entry mode to get me drawing the correct dimension. Now, I could absolutely go and move my mouse over to the glazing here, or the side of the wall, and click to make it perpendicular to this line. However, I want to show you there is something called a temporary O-snap that will allow me to make sure my line is perpendicular. And the way you access that, normally we've been seeing these little green icons. This one says endpoint, this one says midpoint, this one says endpoint. Those are called O-snaps, object snaps, and those force the cursor to snap to particular geometric points on a line or other object. And normally there are several of these turned on. We can force it to temporarily have any one on that we want, to only recognize that one. What I do is I hold down Shift and I right-click, and that is Mac or PC, and we get a list of possible O-snaps. So for example, if I had a circle, I could force it to have the center, or a tangent, or geometry, all these other different things. Anyway, perpendicular is one that I want to use. I don't always want that running, but I want to force AutoCAD to use it this one time. Now you see how as I move my mouse over this line, I get the perpendicular icon, and the icon shows up where the line would go if I were to draw it that way. Okay, so I just move my mouse over that line until I see the perpendicular symbol and click, and now I've got a perpendicular line. And I can come in here and change these lines to the window frame layer. Okay, and I could do the same for the rest of these. I won't harass you with the rest of drawing that. We'll just fast forward to the completed interior lines of the plan. Okay, that was fast, wasn't it? And of course, I'm just drawing this example of a classroom. You'll want to take good field measurements, and I would recommend drawing an existing conditions type of drawing, which is very common, on the site. Take a laptop or something with you that you can draw all these measurements, because you're always going to miss something. And I know that those of you who could see that floor plan I was drafting from, there were definitely some missing dimensions. But the key thing is drawing using the ortho mode is absolutely important for that sort of thing. By the way, you can also draw using what's called polar tracking. Now, polar tracking is a funny thing. It allows you to snap to specific angles. This is good if you have a project where there's a lot of very repeated angles, say, I don't know, a Frank Lloyd Wright building with the hexagonal floor plan. Now, when you draw a line, what it will do is it will allow you to draw off the grid, but it kind of snaps to the angle that you specify. See how my cursor jumps to 45-degree increments? So polar tracking is another way to draw some fun things. But anyway, I'm not going to use that because I don't need polar tracking. Anyway, so you might say, well, this doesn't really look like a floor plan because there are no wall thicknesses. How do you get wall thicknesses? Well, the simplest way is to offset these walls. And we have learned the offset command. Now, of course, interior designers don't always have control over certain things like the exterior dimension, and sometimes there are things hidden inside the walls that force peculiar bumps in the wall. But as a general rule, particularly for sort of residential style construction, exterior walls are going to be about a foot. So I can just type in 12 and then offset these outer walls to a foot. Interior walls are going to be about 6 inches. So I hit enter to finish the offset command and then hit enter again to start it again. But now I'll type in 6 inches. And you don't even need to type inches. You can just hit 6 and enter. And now I can begin by offsetting all of these walls. And you can see here that it's important that you go all the way around the room and that you offset to the correct distance. We measured the interior surfaces because that's what we had visible. The exterior surfaces we're creating using this offset command. Now, obviously, you'd need to check and make sure that you've got the right dimensions. Now, how do we make these lines meet? Well, there are a number of ways. We could use grips. Whoops. Sorry, I was offsetting. We could use grips to, I think I have 2 lines here, yeah. Click the end grip and move it up over the end point. And you see how as I make reference to that point, I get my extension line, and then I can click on the extension line to extend it. An easier thing, though, is to use the chamfer command, C-H-A-M-F-E-R, or just start typing until it gives you the reference there. You can, with the chamfer command, it's meant to draw an angle connecting 2 lines. You can change the distance that it chamfers. I'm going to type in D and enter. And the chamfer distance currently is set to 0. So I could change that to some other angle if I wanted these to connect with some specific distance. But I'm going to leave it at 0. And now I can just click these 2 lines and see how it joins them. What's nice about that is I can remain zoomed way out in the plan, and I can basically kind of make my way around. Again, I'm hitting enter to repeat the command, and it cleans it all up. Now you might say, why am I not doing these end lines? Well, this is the exterior of the building, and I do know that that building continues beyond the space that I'm working on. The same with this corridor. These continue off beyond what I have drawn, so I know that they should be drawn past that. I'm going to draw the extensions on these guys, and again I'm going to make reference to that endpoint that I wanted to match, and now just by using the extension line I'm able to draw a very nice neat. So AutoCAD has its own break line feature that you can draw break lines with, and it's actually called, you guessed it, break line. And the way this works, you basically draw 2 points that represent the length of the line, and then you click on the spot where you want the break to actually occur. There's the break. I usually leave that on the wall layer. Okay. To draw a break line, one thing is that you can specify the size, and here's where life gets a little more complicated. I'll type S for size. The size of the break line is the printed size, not the drawing size. Okay, so just be aware of that as you draw it. What I'm going to do, I'm going to actually do the thing I said not to do in the last lecture, which is I'm going to select this object, the break line, get its properties, and it's basically a polyline, by the way. And normally I said don't change the line weight, let it just be by layer. But I like my break lines to be nice and dark, but I also like them to be on the wall layer. So I'm just going to make it darker by choosing some other number. And of course, that's a matter of preference, and some people prefer that the squiggle be darker than the rest of it. There's all sorts of peculiarities, and some people prefer more of a spline. That's, kind of a matter of personal preference. And also, some people don't like when you have the kind of hanging little bits there. So absolutely, you can move this guy down just a hair and make it nice and neat that way too. Anyway, I'm going to copy that around so that we have break lines all over in our drawing. And we'll put one there. Okay. Now you might say, hey, these walls are extended a little too far. This is where we can use our stretch command. Draw it over the break line and the endpoints there, and neaten up our floor plan a little bit. Okay. So there you go. There is basically the start of our floor plan. Now, the only thing that is left to do is to create the door here. And the door basically is a new type of object. Remember, and go and find the door layer and double click on it. Make that the current layer. If you are a Windows user and you have a nice big screen, there is a drop-down list up in the top in the Layers section. Then you can just choose your current layer that way. Again, I like to draw with as much kind of square footage as possible on the screen, so I leave it off. So a door can be drawn using a rectangle here in our open space. Just type in rectangle, rectang, and enter. Now, some people prefer to start the rectangle on the endpoint. Some people want it in the middle, and some people want it in some random spot in between. I'm just going to go with the endpoint here. Start drawing the rectangle, but I don't need to draw it using direct entry. I can actually type in dimensions for the rectangle. Just type in D and enter. And what it wants to know is the length and width. And I always get these reversed, but I believe the length is the X dimension. I'm going to type in 2. Typically doors are 1.75 inches or so, but 2 is fine for our purposes. And they're about 3 feet long. Oh yeah, I got it right. How about that? Then it wants to know where do you want to place that 2-inch by 3-foot rectangle. And you just find the location and click rectangle. Okay. It just so happens that my door layer is the same color. So let's change that. It's the same color as the wall, and let's pick a darker green so that we can recognize it. Okay, there we go. Oh, there we go. Much clearer. Now, the last thing that you want to draw is a dashed line to represent the swing of the door. And the way that you draw that is with an arc. And again, just type in the word arc. As I mentioned, there are no buttons here, so I can't look for the arc command. But what you'd see if you saw the arc command is that there are a number of different ways to draw an arc. The easiest one, the one that is the default value, is just click once on the endpoint, turn off ortho here, once in the midpoint, and then once to finish the arc. Okay. There are, again, a million different ways to draw this arc, and once you've drawn it, you can make certain changes. For example, if I want to make it more archy. Anyway, the other thing is, what layer should that go to? There are 2 ways that you can change a layer of an object. You can just choose, right-click on the object, and from the context menu, choose Move to Layer. Okay, and then it will give you a list, and you can choose a layer. Now, I happen to know that this layer is called hidden lines in plan. Hidden lines is AutoCAD speak for dashed lines. Okay. Now, if you're not sure, you may end up going through this list and being like, well, I don't know which one it is. So you could choose it that way and see how it becomes dashed. You could also go to the full-on layer menu and take a look at what the properties of these layers are. So for example, this is the door layer. I could choose hidden line in plan, and I can see that it's a dashed line. That's a light line weight. Okay. By the way, some people will come and change the object, and instead of changing it to hidden line and plan, they will just leave it on the door layer and change it to have the properties of a hidden line, and that's fine. You can do it that way too. Now, anyway, the other thing that you can change, you see how the dashes are kind of wide set? Now, you can absolutely change the properties of the layer to have a different line type scale. Sometimes these dashed lines are fine for some objects, maybe a circle that represents a handicap turnaround, but sometimes you want the lines to be either tighter or more narrow. There's two ways you can do that, but the simplest one is just go to the properties of that line and change something called the line type scale of that object. So if I want them tighter together, it's kind of like a hatch pattern. I can change it to 0.5 and they'll have more lines. If I change it to a higher number, 2 for example, it's double. Now by default, the line type scale in the drawing is 1. So I could also change the properties of the layer rather than fiddling around with it here on the individual object. What I found is that with dashed lines, because they vary in length, that there is often a need to kind of change the scale of these things. If you want to change the line type scale of the entire drawing, you can type in LTS and enter, and normally it's 1. You can change the entire drawing, and sometimes you need to do this if you're changing scale of an object and you need you're changing scale of the entire drawing. Say when you're going from schematic design, which might be a small plan, to design development, where you need a higher size plan, maybe that's the way to change all the lines without changing each individual layer. Anyway, so that is line type scale. Okay, so now it's time to put some furniture into our project. Now, you might say, why don't I just draw a bunch of rectangles and call it a day? You could do that, but it's much easier to use what are called blocks. And blocks are objects in AutoCAD that are basically kind of exact copies of each other. They're collections of different objects. But what happens is if you edit one block, you will change all instances of that block. Let me show you what I mean. First of all, you have to type in insert, okay? And when you choose insert, depending on the drawing you have, there may be any number of things in your project already. So for example, this one has a bunch of tables. This is the template that I have. You can see by choosing these tables that there are these are ready-made. Who knows who drew these? They came off of the so-called internet. These objects are already drawn and they're very handy to manipulate. By the way, when you insert these objects, typically you insert them connected to your cursor. There are, and that's why this specify on screen button is checked here next to the insertion point. You can absolutely use coordinates, and those of you with more precision needed, say an engineer, that would probably be better. You can also modify the angle, and if there are units issues, you can check those, and the same with the scale, but usually you just insert it as is and kind of hope for the best. Okay, so there is my table and chair, and what's nice is I can copy that, and all I have to do is select one object, and it makes a nice, neat copy. Okay. Now, if I wanted a series of rows of these objects, one thing I could do is I could select these guys, and I could use the copy command or the array command. I could also use what's called the group command. Select the and what that did is, sorry, I already had them selected. It turns them, it kind of glues them together, okay? And that can make it easier when you want to copy Now, once again, I just have one to select. And if you're doing, say, I don't know, varied rows of a concert hall or something like that, perhaps that's the easier way to go at it. To ungroup these guys, you can select them and just go to group and ungroup. Whoops, I guess I have to do them one by one. Right-click on it and choose ungroup, or Shift-Command-G. Okay, and there's other editing commands that you can use to change these. Now, you might say, well, what if I don't like the way this looks? What if I want to modify this block? All you have to do is right-click on it and choose Block Editor. What that will do, it puts you into this funny space. It's kind of gray. And now you are editing the block. And there's a couple of things that you'll notice when you're editing the block. Well, obviously, first of all, everything is gray. Also, if you check the properties of these objects are all drawn on a layer that I said not to draw on. What were these people thinking? It's layer 0. Well, the reason is when you draw inside a block, and again, basically a block is kind of a box filled with different kinds of objects, arcs, rectangles, polylines, lines. If you draw them on layer 0, that forces those objects to take the properties of whatever layer the block is on. So that's the first thing that's a little weird. Now, if I want to change these, maybe I want to move the chairs, or maybe I want to, I don't know, rotate them. Oops. Type in rotate. Select these objects, and I don't know, make it look a little bit like it's being used. Here, we'll even move these guys under here, and then I'll trim off the extra. There we go. Now that looks stylish, doesn't it? That really looks like a table that's being used. Okay, there we go. Beautiful. So you might say, okay, that looks terrific. Let's save it. Hit save. And when you, by the way, if you make a change and you don't want it to change all of the ones in your drawing, you can choose this Save New option. I'm just going to save, and it's going to change them all. When I hit close, what you'll see is now they've all changed. That's a very powerful feature. It can also be very dangerous, so you have to be careful when you make changes to blocks to be aware of that. Anyway, when you go in here and you change the object's layer, again, I'll go to the Properties menu and change the layer to something like furniture. Okay, all of the lines will take on the properties of the furniture. And you might say, well, what if I want a little more line work, a little something more interesting in here? If you go and go back to the block editor, and let's say you select this outer rectangle, and you say, that would look better if it was a slightly heavier line weight. So rather than go by layer, maybe I'll make that 0.35. Okay, and we'll save this guy and close. And now you can get a little more definition out of those tables. Okay, and again, all of these objects want to be on that correct layer. I only changed one. Just resist the temptation to change the layer of the objects inside the block. It just it kind of causes everything to go haywire. Okay. Now, another thing, when you are doing something like space planning, a lot of times you want to move an object or insert an object. We'll go back to insert. We'll use let's use a slightly different tool. Actually, I think there were some funny ones in here. Let's put I think there were some chickens in here. Everybody always loves chickens, right? There we go. It's a chicken group. Oh, yeah, we need some chickens in our drawing. I'll click Insert. Sometimes you want to place objects some specific distance, say, from a corner or from the center of the room. When you're inserting an object, you can drag your mouse down, and because you're having your tracking readout, you can type in a dimension, say 5 feet, and it will place that object 5 feet along that extension line. And you can do this with lines as well. If I start a line and I use, I don't know, I'll just start it off some nearest point on this wall. I'll start it off at the same point here. I'll use my extension line. Let's say I want it to be, I don't know, 6 feet off of that wall. I'll just type in 6 feet. And now that's where it starts my line. It doesn't start it on the endpoint. So you can use those extension lines and object snap tracking to help you to find places in your plan that make reference to other geometric points. Okay, so there we go. We've got our own blocks. Let's say we want to create a block that is not one that we've inserted from somewhere else. We want to draw our own. Let's say we have, I don't know, a spline for a beanbag or something like that. You know, I don't know. There we go. Beautiful. That's a beanbag. I guess it's being used here, so you know it's getting kind of mushed. If we wanted to create a block for that, well, all you do is you type in the word block. Give it a name like beanbag. You'll want to select the objects. You can click that Select Objects button and select the object. When you're done building your selection set, just like with all other commands, hit Enter. You can also give it a base point. Now, by default, it chooses 0, 0, 0, which is the XYZ origin. We don't want to use the origin. We want to pick a point that is logical based on this shape and how you would typically grab it. Chairs, for example, you often grab them by an end point or a midpoint of the back of the chair. In this case, we'll probably just use the middle of the object. And you see how it's given us a base point that is some number. Okay. And there are some other things that you can change, and even the scale and the units. But other than that, you just choose Create Block. What will happen, the objects you've selected will be converted to a block. Okay, so I create a block. Now, this object, when I click on it, it says block reference instead of spline. Okay. Now, you might say, what if I want to share with somebody? Well, you can W block. So W block, I believe it stands for right block. And that is, again, an operation where you can create a block, but instead of saving it inside your drawing, you can save it onto your computer somewhere. You can just browse to find the place that you want to save it. Okay, and it will leave it in your drawing. Okay, so you don't need to do anything. And you might say, well, what if somebody gives me a block? For example, in our previous exercise, we used this carpet. Well, we can insert that carpet. All you have to do is click the Browse button, and that will allow you to find a file that you've created. Where did I put it? I think I put it right here. Now, of course, this object I don't believe had any scale. So what I'm going to do, we were just drawing this before. Now, interesting enough, it detected that something's up with this. Normally, it goes 0, 0, 0 for the scale. We're going to go specify on screen. Now, when I insert the block, I can choose how big it wants to be, or I can just hit Enter and use a scale factor. Let's try 1. There we go. There, and that's pretty good. Now, you might say, well, that's kind of, I wanted a really big carpet. You can absolutely use the scale tool that we learned last time, and we can either do it visually by moving the mouse, or we can type in some number, or we can use a reference line, which is probably the best way to do it in this case, so I can specify exactly how big I want this to be in my room. And there you go, you have a beautiful carpet. Now, of course, don't forget we drew this, everything is on different layers and all that kind of thing. So once you've inserted it, it becomes part of this drawing. We can now use the block editor, select all these objects, and you see how it says multiple values for the layer. We can just put them on layer 0 and save. We'll just close, and there we go. Now when I put this on the furniture layer, it should be good. Put that on the furniture layer. Actually, I'll put it on the flooring layer. Okay, so there you go. That's one of many ways to draw elements in your drawing. Now, there's a few things that we haven't drawn. For example, in the window, you have a sill. So here's another drawing trick. I like to keep my screen pretty clean, but I want to change the layer that's my current layer I can just, with nothing selected, and again I hit escape a couple times, I'll choose the layer that I want it to be on, and I believe there's a windowsill layer. Now I can draw the windowsill here. It sticks in about an inch. And then I'll draw over. And again, I'm going to use my extension line to complete the sill. Okay, and I happen to know that this sill is about the same on the outside. And of course, I need to make sure we get that exactly right. Now, oh wait, the sill is a little bigger on the outside. I'm going to stretch it so that it's just a little bit longer. This is pretty typical. Exterior sills tend to stick out a little more, just for weather purposes. And you might even say, well, what about the bottom of the window frame? Again, you can choose window frame, but that happens to give us a dark line. So I'm going to stick with this windowsill layer, but there are these lines that are the bottom of this window. Okay, and those represent the the frame below. And now I can just copy those guys. And if I drew this correctly, which is always a question in my mind, I should be able to copy these guys over and get a nice, neat drawing. Okay, and in fact, I believe that there's a sill on this window as well. Okay, I'll just trim away these extra bits here that we don't need. There you go. That's a nice, neat, clean drawing. You could, even if there was a threshold on the door, I don't believe there is, but if there was, let's just draw one for the heck of it. You can go, and I believe there's a layer for thresholds. If there isn't a layer for the object that you want to draw, for the element of the room, by all means, make a layer for that type of drawing. Okay, and again, thresholds, they tend to be fairly light in the drawing. All right, so there is our floor plan. You could even add Poche if you wanted to, and that is a hatch pattern. Okay, and the trick with hatch patterns, and I may have mentioned this before, is that it's very important that you be able to see the entire wall when you hatch. If you are zoomed too far in, it will not work. And then again, like before, change the scale. I don't remember what scale worked well. 12 looks pretty good. Okay, escape to finish the hatch command, and then you probably want to put these guys on something other than the walls. Oops, the walls layer. Probably the Poche layer, if there is one. Oh yeah, there is one. Look at that. Okay. Again, Poche is the kind of thing you often want to change the line weight of to get an effective drawing. You don't want it too dark, but you don't want it too light. Okay. Finally, sometimes people like to put in a pattern for the floor, depending on the type of drawing. If it's more of a schematic drawing, then that's fine. One trick about doing the floor, it is nice if it goes under the furniture, so put in the furniture first. The other thing is it can get a bit much if you draw it over the entire floor plan. So what I do, oops, I have ortho on, I draw kind of a slash to represent the, to cut off the floor plan. And let me set my layer. I'm going to hit escape and set my current layer to flooring. And now when I do the hatch command, and I pick an internal point, it will draw that slash around, it will draw the flooring around that slash. Don't forget to draw inside the door, okay? And you can try to remove points by using this remove boundary tool. Sometimes you can get it to work. Sometimes you can't. It depends on how the object was drawn. Okay, so in this case, well, that didn't quite work. So let's try the hatch command again. But perhaps this time I'm going to move my dividing line out a little bit so that I just have a little bit of the furniture visible. Again, sometimes the hatch command has a little bit of trouble figuring out the boundary that you want. Let's see if it does better this time. Oh yeah, see that? So these slashing lines can really be helpful. Again, don't forget to add the door. And then let's choose a pattern that's something a little more interesting. How about, we'll choose these guys, and we can change the scale back to 1. Oh, no, change the scale up to 24, or even 36. We could also use a user-defined pattern that is, a tile or something like that. And we can even edit this to have a different base point. But basically, that's how you can hatch a piece of a plan. You can delete this extra line. You see how it has a nice effect to it. It doesn't really fade off as nicely as a hand-drawn plan, but it still looks pretty good. So that is the basics of how to draw a floor plan, and hopefully you'll find that helpful.